going, and the idea is to just let her rip, no breaks.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. Yeah. So it was really good for me to be away for 1 year, but now it's really good to be back. How are you guys?
We're great.
Awesome, awesome. So I think you've gotten a description, and I will probably talk about things that are not on that description. I think this studio might be a good match for those that might be interested in taking on a kind of pre-thesis experience where you are responsible for writing a lot of the parameters of the studio, and where you are going to be encouraged to develop your own way of working and the means through which you represent an architectural project. These are two of my favorite paintings by René Magritte, and I also like the titles very much because as designers we are trained to look at things very carefully and also to make relationships between those two things. But those relationships have to be made based on some type of criteria, and that's the criteria and the values that you bring to the work, and that's what makes it your work. As you know, we're going to be working with one particular novel written by Rob Grier. That novel is illustrated solely by the paintings of René Magritte, and you're going to be receiving some excerpts of text and one image, and these things are going to be given to you by chance, and this is the way in which you're going to initiate the work. But in the beginning, we're going to be working through abstraction and through experimentation. You're going to be testing things that are of interest to you, and I hope that your desks look this way. And then we're going to be working simultaneously through 3 agents, the making of artifacts, the making of drawings, and the writings for the work. So this gives you a sense of the type of artifacts or abstract notions that are scaleless, but definitely hold ideas, and those ideas can be translated. Also techniques that may be of interest to you. The studio is kind of being given as a laboratory for experimenting through making and drawings and writing. So writing is a craft in its own right. We often take this for granted. I'm someone who prefers succinct and brief statements, but statements that are loaded with and that carry a lot of mileage. So that's something that one has to do and continually revise doing a thesis experience. So this is an opportunity to start earlier. Right? So the craft of writing can also be spatial, right? There are ways of constructing ideas visually through words. And as you begin to identify personal interest, ways that you would like to pursue an investigation, the project starts to become or move into the direction of a comprehensive studio proposal in which you are writing the criteria. I'm giving you minimal agents, and you construct the rest. But there will be an architectural proposal at some point in the studio that will be drawn, that will hold your thesis or your ideas, that will be represented with the means that support those ideas. And ultimately, the lesson is to understand how abstract means or beginnings get actually materialized in the world. So these are 3 examples of conceptual marks for projects that have actually been built. And finally, there's a component of the studio where the body of work produced will be curated at the end. And this is an exercise in knowing what to edit, what to keep, and how do you present it. And as part of that presentation, there's going to be the construction of what I call a cabinet of affinities, in which the whole work for the semester will be contained and presented. And the material construction of that also holds the same ideas that you have been working through in the semester. So I put a more complete syllabus in the office on the desk. Please read it all, even the fine print. And the book that we're going to use has been placed on reserve in the library if you want to take a look at that. And I'll be around for questions if you have any afterwards. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Masu. And basically, at a moment when our political discourse is saturated with spectacle and mass hysteria, we'll be sampling from a series of projects that were generated during the birth of neoliberalism. Using the young French philosopher Tristan Garcia's book, Form and Object, as a point of departure, the studio examines the notion of architecture as the difference between content and container. Content is defined by a selection of architectural concepts that will be carefully sampled, edited, and combined, while container will be defined by the analysis of a specific site of contestation in Addis Ababa. To that end, studio participants will begin by developing definitions for failure as it pertains to the discipline of architecture and the capital of Ethiopia. Despite being one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the city, Mercato has predominantly operated as a horizontal marketplace for the past 80 years. But it's important to note that there is incredible complexity within this architecture that has been negotiated and built over an extended period of time. The market is currently experiencing another radical phase of transformation with the reestablishment of a neoliberal, basically free market economy, and a new zoning code with where the complex organizational systems on the ground are being erased and replaced by 5-story malls. Participants will select projects from one of the most opulent decades in recent architectural history, 1978 to 1988. In essence, each participant will be responsible for selecting one project for the studio's collective catalog and defining its failure. By specifying the project's failures, we'll move away from its embedded heroism and test its relevance within the context of today. Participants will investigate the critical debates and design decisions that have contributed to the ongoing urbanization of Addis Mercato. At a time when technology facilitates unprecedented flattening of the past, the studio aims to develop historical depth by inventing tools to selectively navigate and further mine this endless maze of image consumption. Studio participants will critically analyze and translate drawings, text, and photographs of the projects in the collective catalog. Participants will be executing research and proposing interventions without physically visiting the site. All work will be done remotely from Providence by relying on a limited set of archival materials. There is no Google Street View in Addis Mercato, so its relative invisibility will help us problematize contemporary notions of global architecture. Participants will work in pairs to test various combinations, organizational, representational, and material of the fragments from the collective catalog. The failures that have been defined through the analysis of the container will form the negotiation, use, and misuse of the content. Accepting the zoning requirement to build every block up to a minimum of 5 stories will collectively engage the market's transition from a horizontal patchwork of shops to a collection of malls. We will invent new mall types by subjecting them to the constraints of the market and the city. This is basically a prototypical interior of a mall in Mercato today. And this is a photograph of what is considered to be the first indoor shopping mall, which was ironically designed by a socialist from Vienna named Victor Gruen. So we will briefly investigate the genealogy of the mall as a type, from something like this in the late 1950s to something like this by the early 1980s. Accepting architecture's relative permanence, participants will design spatial strategies to empower specific stakeholders and address the ongoing struggles within the city. The studio will invent means of representation by reclaiming the information that has been excluded from the projects and drawings in the collective catalog. Mining key episodes from its historical evolution, we will redefine Mercato's relationship to the layered complexity of Addis Ababa. Exploiting the difference between content and container, participants will tactically resist or intensify the political systems of inclusion and exclusion that exist between the city and its architecture. The studio will follow the research through design methodology, so we'll be designing and drawing architecture from day one. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be back. Missed being in the BEB last year. I've always been interested in the amazing complexity of the work we do, of course, and it's one of the reasons why I've always been involved with integrated building systems. Particularly the challenge of making brilliantly executed three-dimensional compositions work flawlessly to enable and ennoble and enhance the day-to-day tasks that buildings are actually constructed to accomplish. I'm really interested in the relationship between form and program as a driver in making our work come to life. So we know that some buildings are commissioned actually to be true works of art. Clients and architects join in a common goal to create a public monument. And occasionally these buildings do in fact become iconic. Backed by community resources and our lay cousins, we can create buildings which reflect and shape our own visions of the future and maybe the current. Great buildings become protagonists in the world of art and ideas and transcend their milieu. I remember a couple of years ago visiting Piano's addition to the Con at the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth with Brett. He was kind enough to bring me to see the building just before it opened. The program of this building is relatively simple. Some galleries, small auditorium, a large underground parking area, support spaces, maybe a library. One might say, in fact, the program was simply an excuse for making a huge public work of art. The museum's collection is quite remarkable, I'm sure, but honestly, I can't tell you the name of a single piece. But I can tell you the many wonderful spatial events, the details, the materials, the experience of being there. That I remember. I'm reminded of the fact that when looking at Kahn's work, a series of extraordinary vaults, parallel narrow spaces, that this seems an illogical way to make a building. And yet it's an iconic building, one of the greatest that's been created really in the 20th century. Certainly not necessarily a building we might imagine as a museum. So what is this relationship between what occupies a building as a life inside and what makes its form happen? So even though in their commission, most building programs make no reference to a desire for greatness or cultural affirmation, some do so, some become works of art by dint of the pure dedication of the architect with the support of the community. Indeed, all of us in this room aspire to raising even the mundane to cultural significance. So we know that most architectural projects are described in simple programmatic terms, fundamentally. And they often don't even pretend to address issues beyond activities in rooms. The instigators of these works are in need of utility and seek the technical knowledge of the architect to satisfy a very distinct objective. The client's vision is often narrow and immediate. They have neither the ambition nor the compelling directive to make any connection to the wider impact of their work on the built environment. They simply need a facility that's big enough, efficient enough, durable enough, and most often meets an often arbitrary and insufficient budget. Sometimes these designers are anonymous, and they contribute to the community in rather noble ways. Yet we all try, as our predecessors have, to wring meaning from the ordinary. In the USA, public schools reflect this struggle to make meaning out of necessity. These publicly funded facilities are often the largest public buildings in any city or town. Young people and many parents spend large amounts of time in these places, likely more than any other public building. Whether successful as schools or as works of art, they remain a living testimony of a community's commitment both to education and architecture, and as a reflection of the value of their times. The central question of the studio is how one goes about achieving a broad cultural connectedness while engaging distinctive, non-heroic programs. Can ordinary buildings be didactic at multiple levels? Can they inform a public consciousness of community, as well as housing complex and highly specialized activities? The High School of Art and Design for Providence will be our vehicle for engaging this particular issue. So interestingly enough, as some of you know, Providence calls itself the creative capital and rightly boasts of RISD's value to its economic and cultural future. Yet Providence does not have its own art and design high school. How could this be? Despite some preliminary discussions with RISD over a number of years, no concrete concepts have emerged. This studio will propose such a facility. Through a series of quick charrettes, teaching and learning research, a final building will emerge, which will expose our highest intentions in the making of a public building, while coming to terms with the rigorous yet rather ordinary requirements of a public high school for the arts, something that most of you are familiar with. Our goal will be to create a program and develop a model for a net zero energy building, enabling and preparing young people in Providence for careers in fine arts and design. That's the project. Okay.
Aaron,
Wait, I don't, are my slides?
they should be there, let's see. Maybe they were putting that together.
I'm going to present your screen.
People can go out of work. I'll get it now, it's a quick one on the desk. Oh, you can? That would be great. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go out of order. Whoops. All right.
Hi, everybody. So, as you know, Brett and I are doing the studio together. We both like to build, so this is another in a series of design build studios. Right now, right now we're at a unique point in the development of architectural construction and technology that we want to sort of take advantage of. An obvious way to reduce energy and point to a sustainable future is to ask the enclosure of a building to do more work. Experience with the, sorry, should have had this earlier. Experience with the textile house gave us the idea that new and smarter membrane surfaces create an opportunity for innovation. And we are proposing a construction-based studio predicated on the synergistic bonding between structure and these performance membranes.
Yeah. So, what is our problem? Same thing you see in just about all the residential construction we see everywhere in America. The simple wood frame, insulated between sheathed and clad on one side, and finished on the inside. That can't be all there is. Right? This is a standard that's been in place for, as we saw,
100 years.
100 years. Okay? A kind of typical way of building. Now, like all conventions, there's a lot of intelligence built into it. But at the same time, we can also, as these terms change, when we talk about different methods or different technologies for membranes, start to say, how can we then rethink this basis in this convention, which we've kind of taken for granted? And so as a starting point, what we are choosing to begin with is a series of unconventional framing systems. This one developed several hundred years ago by the architect Philippe Delorme. This is a way of making larger elements out of small pieces by mechanically laminating them together with other pieces of wood such that they become three-dimensional system. A more modern idea, this is what's called a grid shell, largely developed by the German engineer Georg Schleich. Another way of spanning long distances by using small uniform, in this case, pieces of wood. And finally, an example here, project by Kengo Kuma, where there is where in his collaborations with the engineer Jun Sato, who you may have seen speak about this project last year, there's a sophisticated use of joinery, which builds on the Japanese tradition, again, of putting wood together. And so, again, you're hearing a theme here, timber, wood. Ways that we can rethink how framing can go together. So we'll begin by constructing based on some of these examples, and we'll then move into incorporating those into a more holistic project of an architectural folly.
You actually forgot one more.
Oh, yeah, one more. See, there is one more. And this is now you're gonna have to help me. Because this one I'm not as familiar with, but it is a form of large-scale timber framing with infill.
This was actually developed in Portugal to resist earthquakes. So this is sort of an excavated photograph of framing within a typical masonry enclosure. But the wood is doing work in conjunction, synergistically with the masonry.
And the primary thing here is that, when we think about the use of wood and timber in light construction, right, it can still be different, let's say, densities and weights of that material, but we want to stick to wood, but we want to ask what are the myriad of ways that we can take many of these unconventional approaches and incorporate new technology back into them and see what comes out at the end.
So what we're going to ask you to do is create an architectural folly for the end. As Pradeep referenced this morning, a folly is a playful experiment. And we have a history in this department and in the school of experiments at full scale. And in this spirit, we're asking you to design and build a full-scale enclosure around the dimensions of your body. And that will be the final work of the semester. We don't plan on dictating the results, but we do find our process will lead to sort of an exciting conclusion of new framing methodologies. And here are a couple of slides of some work done in the past with our department. A little bit about logistics. As Laura mentioned, we will have our new BEB build box outside, which we will take advantage of. So that will be sort of ours for the semester. We will also be sharing one of the seminar rooms on the ground floor with, I believe, Sylvia. Anyway, we'll be sharing the space adjacent to the shop, as well as having desk space up on the second floor. So, and finally, this work will be sponsored, so the materials will be covered by our various grants. Anything else?
No?
Thanks.
Thank you very much, guys.
can I say what I should say? Should I? Yeah. After 53 years, this is my last studio here at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I have thought very, very hard what kind of a studios that should be. And in the end, I decided I should make it a circle and end where I started in 1963. And so this is what we're going to do. We are going to think about the future of architecture. I believe that each generation of architects is asked to re-examine the fundamental premises of the art of making a building. Critical minds have contemplated the meaning of this enterprise throughout history, trying to reach the roots through intuitive and speculative reasoning. And the vehicle for the design studio's investigation will be the human habitat in multiple forms. Architects, critics, historians have dissected iconic examples of the human habitat in search for clues that could give rise to the transmissible and legible logic connecting the human species to its most elementary housing needs. What is the essence of house? Was the rhetorical question Louis Kahn asked in his essay, Wanting to Be. If we could find out what a house would like to be, we would be able to capture the essential premises. When we examine the historic evolution of the human habitat from the primitive hut, the prehistoric Japanese hut, the Pompeian house, the Renaissance villa, the 20th century modern house to our present-day homes, we cannot overlook that the two opposite phenomena, one is cultural and the other technological. The evolution of architecture as a cultural phenomenon, as an expression of the human spirit, is not progressive, but rather fluctuating between innovative periods and periods of human reflection. The evolution of science and technology, which informs architecture, on the other hand, is linear. It is progressive. One discovery follows another. I'm showing you here just a few examples of the human habitat throughout history. A moment ago, I showed you some early primitive hut constructions in Japan. And here you see one of the Pompeian houses in Pompeii, in Italy. The Pompeian house, by the way, which you see here, upon reflection, when you think about it, it's an extraordinary, remarkable, modern and contemporary house. It has all the, and I should speak for myself personally, but I think if I would think of a prototype today for a house, I would think of the Pompeian house. It has the, what you see in the front here, you see the basin for the collecting of the rainwater that comes from an open oculus. The Romans called it the atrium. And it collected the water, and this was really the central official room of the house. And then beyond that, you have the peristyle, which we today call an atrium, which is essentially an enclosed exterior space. And all the rooms and spaces are oriented towards these two public spaces. And I find that absolutely remarkable. And it is surprising that in this, what I'm showing you here, the Katsuri Imperial Villa in Kyoto, And in Kyoto, there are many of these beautiful homes. This is also partially reconstructed. And the openness and the airiness and the modernity of this 17th century Japanese house is just astounding and remarkable. So I have said that architecture has these dual phenomena, the cultural and the technological. And architecture operates in between these polarities. It was Colin Rowe who, in his seminal essay, The Mathematics of the Ideal Villa, challenged the conventional wisdom of viewing the history of architecture in a chronological order. This is amazing. Colin Rowe, this was his master's thesis at Warburg Institute in London in 1945, and became one of the most seminal books in architectural theory when he had the audacity to compare the Villa Capra della Rotonda, which you see on the screen, by Palladio, just outside of Vicenza in Italy, with Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy of 1931, searching for and analyzing common denominators. Oh my God, what did I do? I'm totally out. What? I'm so sorry. No, yeah, keep everything away. All right. With Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, searching for and analyzing common denominators in two seemingly diverse examples of architectural expression. It is indeed a curious phenomenon. It is curious that, and the fact of passage of time that allows us to see and appreciate similarities, constancy across millennia. The Parthenon in Athens and the Seagram's building in New York have more in common than what sets them apart. The principles of architecture are constant and permanent. This, I love this so much, that can't call it an interior, really. And we all know where Le Corbusier took the villa from. He just took it off one of the early transatlantic steamships and put it on, down on the ground, and it became a true icon of early modern architecture. So the design studio will fundamentally examine the principles, the time-honored and permanent principles of architectural design, and we do it in the context or in the vehicle of the human habitat. Each student will be asked to select two iconic works of architecture in the realm of the in the realm of the habitat. Examine them, searching for the underlying roots that attest to the permanence of these principles. These principles need to be articulated, measured, and documented. Examples should be taken from different eras of architectural expression, from prehistoric times to the present, encompassing both Eastern and Western civilization. And we will spend about 2 or 3 weeks to making this comparison. But we're really going to follow Colin Rowe's model to compare two very distinct, different works of architecture and find common denominators. Findings of common grounds will be presented to the class, leading to a manifesto-like credo that is expected to inform the ensuing studio work, that is to design a prototypical, ideal habitat for the 21st century. The Villa La Rotonda it was considered an ideal villa. Some of you will remember it was really Leonardo da Vinci who had this idea of the ideal building, the ideal church, the ideal villa, somewhat earlier than Palladium. The last one that I show you here is an example of iconic design is Philip Johnson's glass house nearby in Connecticut, in New Canaan. And the studio, I have already just searched that. We're going to visit this house. Actually, there are two iconic houses very nearby. One is the Philip Johnson's glass house that you see here, but also Gropius's home in Lincoln, Massachusetts is very, very close by. I've been in both, and we're going to visit both of these houses in the course of the semester. Ideally speaking, I would love also make a field trip to see the falling water, but I'm not sure whether that is within the reach. We would have to fly to Pittsburgh for that. So I hope the studio is appealing to some of you. I showed my program to some of my old friends and they felt it was fairly esoteric. Now that I've seen all my colleagues presenting today, I think I'm pretty conservative. Thank you.
One more interview. So as Friedrich said, it is his, we're going to be making a special occasion of this last studio and inviting guests to join in on the critique as well as support the travel. So we also have spaces for advanced studio students to be in two landscape studios, as we have done in the past. So Sherry, Fulton, and Emily are going to tell you about the first one. We have a limited amount of space for you, but we do have space for those who would like to do it.
Okay, so we're going to begin by talking about landscape scenarios, the future of dam studio. This is a series of maps that look at the location of dams within the United States, dating back from 1850, when we had some of the original gristmill dams, up into the present, where there are now over 100,000 dams within the United States. Here in New England, the number is 14,000 dams that we have. Many of these are very old. They're kind of date back to those old grist mills. Many of them are very small, maybe 10 feet or less, and they aren't used for what they were originally intended for anymore. And many of them, because the life cycle of dams is around 50 years, many of them are coming to the end of their life cycles. And so many communities are having to make decisions about what is the future of this infrastructure, let's say infrastructure within our communities. And so this is an image of one of those aging dams. But many communities are having to make these decisions right now. And this also comes at a time when our ideas of landscapes and our ideas of nature are shifting, right? So away from one that was looking at the landscape as natural resources for extraction, to one that thinks more about the recreational values of the landscape as well as the ecological values of these natural systems. And so part of this is an understanding of what the impact of the dams have been on the landscapes, right? So we have, dams are essentially, you put a fixed object within a fluid landscape, right? And so all of a sudden there are going to be many impacts that result from that action. Some of the most significant impacts are on our fisheries. So within this region, we have, historically, there were very large herring fisheries and salmon, shad, but all of these fisheries right now are essentially commercially extinct. And one of the main reasons for that is because dams have prevented migratory fish from being able to go upstream and spawn and maintain the numbers that were historically within these ecosystems. There also is the impact that it has on sediment and nutrients within these systems, right? So when you put this fixed object in the river system, something's going to happen with the sediment that's moving downstream. And so a lot of the sediment gets caught up behind the dams, and so there's large questions about what the impact of that dam is on the movement of sediments as well as nutrients within these systems. But at the same time, so we have this aging infrastructure, but we also have communities who've grown up with these dams within their landscape. And so there's this very complex social and ecological relationship that's resulted where communities feel very closely identified with their dams, right? Often we see them on old postcards or on the town seal, you'll see an image of a dam. And so in some ways, these decisions are quite complex, and communities are often quite fragmented in terms of their ideas of what should happen to the dam, which leads to a very contested public process. And also people grow up loving the resource that it provides, right? So many dams you have impoundments behind, which mean that people get to fish, swim, as well as boat on these impoundments. And so within this studio, we're going to be looking at the dams and within New England, and we're going to be specifically using dams as a frame to investigate questions of the design, management, and visualization of landscapes at a range of spatial and temporal scales. We're going to begin the semester by looking at some of these different trade-offs that are factors within the dams. So looking at the geographic, regulatory, hydrologic, urban, political, cultural, and ecological systems that have shaped the dam infrastructure within New England. And we're also, so during this first stage of the semester, we're going to develop a small publication that essentially is looking at some of these trade-offs and helping to understand and analyze these trade-offs within these systems. We're then going to use that as a lens to look at a couple of specific river systems. So this is one down here on the Pawcatuck River, which is in southern Rhode Island, that we'll be looking at, where multiple dams have already been removed, and there's one remaining dam that is preventing fish passage. And so we're going to be looking at some of these specific systems of the whole river, understanding the number of dams that are along the rivers, and how that begins to play into the decisions and the importance of certain decisions about dams. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at the role of visualization in order to look at different scenarios, right? So there are many different scenarios of different possible outcomes for many of these dam sites, ranging from full removal to partial removal to and to other kind of hybrid scenarios. And so we'll be looking at both those possibilities for the different dam sites, as well as the way in which visualizations could be used for the decision-making process. So how can we actually use our tools as designers, as in visualization representation, to help communities that are at that point of having to make those decisions. And also kind of looking at the role of scenarios within landscapes. Oftentimes when we're dealing with large-scale landscapes, using scenarios is a good way for us to look at various options. And so we'll be doing that within the studio. Do you want to talk about the structure, or do we talk about the structure of the studio?
Well, first I'd say this is part of a 4-year study that's funded by the National Science Foundation through EPSCoR 2, and we're working on this in collaboration with universities in Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. So hydrologists, economists, sort of the full gamut of riverine scientists are collaborating with us on this project, as well as environmental rhetoricians. So we're pretty excited about the level of expertise that is coming into this. They in turn are very interested in this. EPSCoR Track 2 is funded as a way to bring together scientists and designers to work across disciplines to understand how both sides benefit from design thinking and by applied design methodologies. So it's experimental, it's very much where the future of landscape architecture is going, and also where the future of deciding what happens to our environment is going. So it's an opportunity to play a role in that. The studio will be structured, you mean in terms of schedule? Sorry.
Oh yeah, and so the numbers are.
So we have seats for 2 architecture students. We are looking for people who already have some ability to model in 2 and 3 dimensions digitally, and an interest in taking on the topographic and hydrological modeling that will be necessary to the studio. So it's something we all have a steep learning curve in this. You won't be alone, but I think it's a rare opportunity to work with the breadth and depth of scientists that this project involves. The project will go from here to the publication, to a course in the spring on methodologies of community engagement, to charrettes next summer with the decision makers of 2 dam systems. So our role in this is really to help the other research, our colleagues, to understand what it means to bring 2- and 3-dimensional representations to decision-making process. So the more that we're able to add to that, the further this study goes. So if you want to speak more with us about that afterwards, please come and do so.
The only other thing I would add is that we're going to be running the studio. It's going to be highly kind of like, it's like a research collaborative. We're going to be working as a team to research this. We'll be working as a team to develop some of the scenarios. And so it's for people who are interested in getting involved in this as a group project.
Okay. The instructors for Constructed Landscape couldn't be here today, so I'm going to present for them. Constructed Landscape is the third in the Landscape Core studio sequence, and it's the studio in which we transition our investigation into the character and dynamic attributes of site into the larger urban scale. It will be taught this year by Sai-Hun Kim. Leslie Lee. Sai is an architect, actually a RISD grad, and an urban designer by training. Leslie Lee is a landscape architect and urban designer. Michael Blyer is a landscape architect and member of the RISD faculty, and Kaki Martin also, all working at the urban scale. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. No, I'm not. There we go. Okay, this is a diagram. Many of you may have seen this, but this is Boston, and the different colors indicate the levels of fill. The red is Boston in 1630, and then increasingly as land was added. I'm showing this because we, fundamentally in urban landscapes, there is no natural land. All of the land has either been constructed, either by being placed there through fill, or it's been excavated, or it's been manipulated. So there is no nature in terms of pre-existing landscape form in the city. Even Central Park, for those of you who have seen pictures, is entirely constructed. So the constructed landscape is a blanket condition in all urbanizations, and it takes different forms. So whereas this is the Big Dig in Boston with the before, the elevated highway, and then the greenway that has been built since then. So whereas we tend to think of the infrastructure in the city as being constructed, we think of roads, we think of the hard surfaces. In fact, pretty much all of it has been constructed. Some of it, like the greenway, is often on platforms that may be no thicker than a foot in some places, sometimes 3 feet, sometimes deeper, but what we look at as lawn or park space frequently has a very different reality than having arrived there through acts of geology, hydrology, and weather. Increasingly, with climate change and ocean level rise, landscapes in urbanizations are looked to, park design, landscapes of all kinds, to solve all the problems of changing storm patterns, of new drainage, needs for drainage and stormwater management in the city, of rising and changing coastlines. So parks are being asked to do a lot, not only coastal parks, but parks that are embedded further in the city that are meant to accommodate transportation infrastructure, other civic uses, and frequently competing programs that are social. This is one of the Greenway parks in the North End, designed by Gustafson Guthrie Nichols. The deck on this is 3 feet maximum, so everything that was designed here was constructed to provide growing conditions that were capable of sustainably supporting vegetation over several decades. The fountains, the foundations for all of the arbor and all of the rest of the pavilions, very thin. Other park conditions, not so much so. But I'm pointing this out as the degree to which a constructed landscape not only takes on what is planted or the landform, but it also has to accommodate any of the architectural program that's included to meet the programmatic desires for the landscape. This studio will address that. The studio will happen in 2 parts. The first part is a mapping of the sub-regional context of Boston, the infrastructure, the landscape infrastructure, and the infrastructure of the built environment. and then it will transition to a discrete site scale design project. I'm showing this one is the Mass College of Art Plaza, designed by Shauna Gilly-Smith at Ground, as an example of where we're planning to go with this. The second half of the studio will be working on sites in the South End, where the neighborhoods are changing quickly with frequently, with demographics and different programmatic uses that are in high levels of tension in terms of desired program. So this part of the studio will address the findings from the analysis of the first half, and then go into as detailed and refined a schematic site design as possible, meeting all of the prevailing zoning requirements, meeting existing grades on the edges, but designing within an envelope in which landscape architects frequently find themselves, and then taking it down to the discrete design of site elements. The course coordinates with Landscape Technology and Materials 2, in which some of the site elements are actually addressed at a one-to-one scale and fabricated. You don't need to take that course to take the studio. But if the studio is a really good chance to look at what the elements, the technologies, and the expertise that goes into the design of an urban landscape, and to improve grading and topographic skills, as well as the design of site details. And I think there are 2 seats in that. There may be more, but if you have more questions about that, then please ask me. One more thing about the landscape studios: they meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So it's a Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon class time, and it's a Thursday afternoon class time. There will be some field trips in both studios. We realize that sometimes creates some conflicts for the architecture schedule. We have accommodated some of that in the past and could probably do so again this time. So if you have questions, please come and ask about them. Thank you.
Slight change of gears. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so most of you know me. I'm Aaron Forrest. I haven't figured out how to pronounce the name of my studio yet, but the symbol at the top left gives you a sense. And I'll explain a little more in a second. So in 1928, Siegfried Giedion published the book Building in France, Building in Steel, Building in Reinforced Concrete. Though little known today relative to his other publications, Building in France with graphic design and photographs by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was highly influential with the avant-garde and the intelligentsia of the time. The book laid out in graphic format the way that new construction materials, steel and concrete, were creating new possibilities for structure, space, and scale that were in turn creating new conditions for architectural design. The most stunning examples he showed were infrastructural works that opened up the possibility for architecture to address a new mass audience through construction at a gigantic scale. So thanks to this book, architects began experimenting with these materials in their own works at a new clip, creating new forms and spaces that had been impossible with the old ways of building. So here you see the Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion under construction. Over the subsequent half-century, these experiments in form and space matured into typological inventions, the creation of new architectures that synthesize structure, organization, space, program, and circulation. For example, the steel grid designs that characterized the latter half of Mies's career. and the solid void structures in concrete that Louis Kahn became known for. And we have some crossover with Brett and Jonathan's studio here. The studio will also be focusing on wood. And wood, importantly, was not a material that did not really factor into the previous century of architectural invention. It was seen as traditional, structurally weak, and thus incapable of addressing the large-scale architectural and social issues of the day. Wood comfortably belonged to a vernacular building tradition of more interest to craft laborers than high-minded architects. But today, new sustainable mass timber materials, in which many small pieces are glued together in various patterns to create structural members with huge load-bearing capacities, are changing this calculus. With the invention and exponential growth of these technologies, we are able to foresee today new architectural possibilities in wood that the modernists foresaw for concrete and steel. Indeed, architects are beginning to recognize the parallels between wood today and the avant-garde experiments in concrete and steel a century ago, as you can see in this image of the recreation in timber, somewhat crudely, of Le Corbusier's Maison Domino at the 2014 Venice Biennale. So the aim of this studio will be to work in the spirit of invention, to explore new possibilities for space, structure, and organization made possible by mass timber. The nature of the material makes it a rare architectural amalgam that can operate equally well through addition or division, somewhere between frame and mass, steel and concrete. It is likely that we will end up somewhere completely unexpected, working through frame and mass simultaneously to create new hybrids of structure and space to address new social and cultural realities of the 21st century. One of these unexpected places that we will be working is the Azores Islands of Portugal, which is poised to become a center of mass timber design and production, employing a Japanese cedar imported to the remote islands centuries ago. And this is the least spectacular photo I can find of it. So the studio is going to culminate in the design of a community center of about 30,000 square feet in Ponta Delgada, which is the regional capital of the Azores Islands, and whose architectural tradition is based in masonry and concrete. This backdrop will allow us to rethink wood construction free of sentiment from vernacular, and will challenge us to rethink what it means to build in this material in the diverse social and cultural contexts that confront architectural practice today. We're applying for funding for the studio to visit the Azores and possibly the Portuguese mainland as well. That's not guaranteed, but we're optimistic about it, and regardless, it's going to be a very intense and exciting studio. Thank you.
That's it for the Advanced Studio selection. As you know, you're going to receive an email shortly, and then you'll be able to submit your lottery selection via our WUFU site. So remember, only choose one. You have to choose all of your selections. Don't choose the same studio twice. If you do that, you go to the bottom. Just fill out the form in the correct way. It takes us a while to go through that lottery for us to get you to land in the right studio mix. And again, you should expect to get an email shortly. Your selection is not due until tomorrow at 10. And we've videotaped this in case you want to take a look at anything again. We'll be uploading it in a few minutes to our RISD Architecture website, so you can view it again if you want. But before I leave, I just wanted to give Gabriel the floor to talk about his seminar. It was advertised incorrectly through the registration web advisor. So please, can you tell everyone what you're doing?
Hi everybody. I'm very happy, I have to say this. Thank you for this in part. Very happy to be back in Providence after this 2 years in Rome. I teach now for almost 10 years. I teach a course called Reading the City. And in the simplest terms I can explain it, it looks at the relationship between the physical dimension of cities and the cultural phenomenon that happen in those cities. The simplest way I can explain is that we look at maps and tell stories. The course is, as I told some of you, I never wanted to teach this course. I wanted to take it, but nobody would offer it, so I had to volunteer. And so it's a 12-week course, like any course at RISD. So it has a lecture component and a seminar component. And every week, the first and last lecture are special. One looks at the general ideas of how to look at cities, or how we are going to look at cities. And the last one deals with the questions of how all of this informs the design project. So the first one is called Reading the City, the last one is called Writing the City, and in between I lecture about 10 cities, 10 specific cities that sort of addressing different kinds of both physical and cultural questions. And that is about half of the work. I like to say I do half of the work, you do the other half, and means that throughout the semester you will be doing your own research on a particular city, on a particular subject, and typically in the last 6 weeks, students in groups of 2 or 3 present individual work, but present their research on a particular city. Just to give you an example, one of my favorite examples was there are a number of graduate students coming from other departments, and there was one year there was a student from textiles that studied the city of Lyon and how its urban structure related to the way silk is produced in the city. So there are very interesting and rich kinds of questions that come from everything, from the history, from the geography, literature, film, food, and the like. Does that sound good? If anybody is interested in knowing more, I'll be happy to send you. The description is out there, and you know my email, gfeld@risd.edu, or I'll be around.
And one more minute. So we have as you guys know, we have various other elective courses in the department. We have room in one other course. And I'll have Aaron. Aaron talk about that one.
Yeah, so, sorry, I did the same thing. Laura mentioned the Southlight project at the beginning of today that Yasmin and I have been kind of leading throughout the summer, the construction of the project. So we're running together a seminar this fall to kind of close out the project, but and most importantly, to really document the project well. So we're going to be putting together a small publication, including drawings, narrative, photographs, etc., that really kind of rethink how the project happened and how we tell that story to the outside world. So it's going to be a really kind of interesting look at how to use an architectural project as a kind of springboard for future practice and a way of thinking about future practice. So if any of you are interested, it's going to be limited enrollment, but we have a few spots left in it. So just let me know.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. Again, for those of you who want, at 3:30 we have the waiver session and then also the job fair.
should. Hey.